Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. Recently, I have been paying particular attention to Russian apologists, specifically among the right. The strange relationship that some conservatives have had with the Russian government over the years has fascinated and infuriated me. In the case of Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News commentator went to Russia itself and interviewed Putin, who, as I noted in my previous response video, is an alleged war criminal and confirmed dictator. Since then, there has been a variety of criticism about Carlson's interview, but also obsequious defenses of Carlson's pathetic display. Of those defending Carlson, none has been more frustrating and dishonest than Candace Owens. In a segment recorded on February 22nd and released on February 23rd of this year, Owens attempted a bad faith criticism of Jon Stewart and Zakaria, who took Carlson to task for his inaccurate comparison of America to Russia. Throughout her segment, Owens attempted to strawman Stewart and Zakaria, arguing that they solely assert that the dirtiness of American cities is the price of freedom. As always, Owens' video is in the description below, so you know I'm not misrepresenting her. Beginning her argument, Owens primes her audience by complaining that the media unfairly lambasted Carlson for interviewing Putin and that their narrative about Russian authoritarianism collapses under Carlson's coverage, using Jon Stewart as an example of this supposed narrative building.
I think one of the things that changed me the most in my young adulthood, in my 20s, was that I traveled. I traveled a lot because I was working for a family that was a lot wealthier than me, and they traveled a lot, and so it necessarily brought me to all different countries. And it made me, I guess, be able to contextualize America better, right? Because if you're like most Americans, you don't travel. Most Americans, I think, don't even have a passport. America's pretty big. It's pretty expansive. And so when you travel at first, you're definitely probably going to stay within the 50 states. But when you get out of the United States and you see the rest of the world, you start to wonder about certain things. Something that I noticed is that a lot of countries are cleaner than America. And so recently, obviously, the big deal is how dare Tucker Carlson go over to Russia and notice some things. And one of the things that he did was a segment just about the grocery stores in Russia. He talked about how the prices were cheaper. He was actually amazed, because obviously the narrative has been that they're on the brink of economic collapse. And really what happened is he collapsed that narrative. If America is so great, why are we the ones that are suffering at the pump? Why are we the ones that are suffering when we go to the grocery store? And he also highlighted how clean the subways were, which is something that I have noticed. The subways in our inner cities are absolutely filthy. It does not have to be that way. Again, it's not just in Russia. I don't think it's just Russia. Tokyo, unbelievably clean society, also extremely moral in the stance that in the circumstance that you could drop your wallet in Tokyo and someone would return it. Nobody would steal it. It just doesn't have to be this way. Well, the mainstream media is like, oh my gosh, we don't want people to notice. We keep telling everybody that America's great and it's fine. When in reality, it kind of feels like we become the commies. You're just taking so much money from the taxpayer. We don't know where it's going. It keeps disappearing. We can't have any accounting. We're taking billions, but we can't account for it anymore. We don't know where it went. Ukrainians are suspiciously buying yachts, but we don't know where the money went. We don't know where the money went. And people are starting to notice. And so these mainstream journalists, these mainstream nighttime talk hosts are now going, narrative, what do we do? And so what they're doing is they're trying to convince you to take pride in the filth. I'm not kidding. Listen to the narrative. Listen to Jon Stewart on The Daily Show tell you why you should be fine with the filth.
Right. Because the difference between our urinal chaotic subways and your candelabra beautiful subways is the literal price of freedom.
You're free, guys. We're free. You just enjoy that. Okay, who cares? They've got candelabras lit and nice music. It smells good down there. At least you're free. By the way, do you guys feel free right now? That's the thing I love. Are you feeling the freedom as we've had to fight speech censors, how they've gotten very dramatic as they're trying to force vax you at work? There had to be an actual lawsuit to stop that, and people being forced vaxxed, and because it's obviously wrong and it's absurd that it even had to go to the Supreme Court, and your government wants more and more territory, is making more and more incursions into our personal lives. But hey, no. At least these people want you to know that is the literal price of freedom. Everything will be filth. We are going to force vaccinate you whenever we want. We're going to force vaccinate your children. We are going to essentially declare a war on the family unit, but it's still free.
Normally, I wouldn't be so blunt about how bad Owens' arguments are, but this is asinine. Owens ridiculously complains about the cost of goods in America, seemingly implying that the United States has it worse than everyday Russians. She doesn't provide any data to prove this, because if she did, she would have to admit that Russians are suffering more than Americans. According to Reuters, nearly 50% of Russians surveyed said their salaries don't cover basic needs, an increase of almost 20% compared to the previous 2 years. 45% of the respondents say they don't have enough to get necessities, as they were at least $212 short each month to pay for their goods. By contrast, only 1 in 8 Americans say the same. Not ideal, but still significantly better than Russia. Regarding annual household income, Russians perform significantly worse than Americans. The annual household income per capita in Russia was $7,082 USD in December of 2023. By contrast, the annual household income per capita in the United States in 2022 was $39,167. Even when we look at the long-term data, the United States has a clear increase in income, while Russia doesn't. At best, it would be embarrassing if Owens had not researched the economic reality of Russia and its people, but she didn't just do that. She completely clipped Stewart out of context and ignored what the segment actually meant. If she had actually gone into what Stewart had said in its proper context, Owens would have to admit that what Carlson was doing was nothing more than a vapid appeal to aesthetics.
Grocery cart, and the doors open automatically. Oh, Mother Russia.
Russia is famous for its bread, which is one thing I can assess pretty well. Look at that. It's fresh, too. Look at that. Oh, come on.
The guy really likes bread. I hate to think what would have happened if he had found a bagel. But hey, if being a free speech warrior means you have to bang the occasional sourdough, that's droga. But our time is limited. Could you drive home the purpose of your deception on this trip in the most cynical way possible, please?
We didn't pay any attention to costs as we were just putting in the cart what we would actually eat over a week. And we all came in around $400, about $400. It was $104 US here. And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders. That's how I feel anyway, radicalized.
Radicalized. And it will radicalize you unless you understand basic economics. See, $104 for groceries sounds like a great bargain unless you realize Russians earn less than $200 a week. But that's the kind of context that what did you call yourself earlier? A journalist would have provided. But here's the reality. You know all this because you aren't as dumb as your face would have us believe. Perhaps if your handlers had allowed, you would have seen there was a hidden fee to your cheap groceries and orderly streets. Ask Alexei Navalny or any of his supporters.
In Vladimir Putin's Russia, political repression is everywhere. And hundreds have been arrested for daring to honor Navalny so publicly.
Right. Because the difference between our urinal-caked chaotic subways and your candelabra beautiful subways is the literal price of freedom.
Stewart never said that we should accept mediocrity. If you watch the full segment, linked in the description box below, you will know that he spent the first several minutes of his segment criticizing the media's treatment of Biden's age. What he was criticizing was Carlson's complete disregard for the painful reality of living under Putin's regime, a regime built on death, poverty, and the exploitation of its citizens. Russians can't protest without getting arrested, and American journalists such as Evan Gershkovich have been falsely imprisoned for merely being critical of the Russian Federation. The only way that Owens can justify her position is to ignore the evidence against her anecdotal clips. And it isn't just Jon Stewart that she did this to. In her coverage of Fareed Zakaria's segment, she again completely ignores what is being said about Russia and its cities.
Maybe if they say it enough times, we'll believe them. So let's now cut to CNN's Fareed Zakaria, who's also weighing in and trying to remind you with a lot of passion that it's totally fine if everything is filthy. Take a listen.
American cities are expressions of democracy, places where people have to negotiate differences and find ways to live together. That makes them messier and dirtier and sometimes chaotic. But perhaps that is what has made these cities so vibrant and innovative, and why they have been at the forefront in making America the country that leads the world in economics, technology, culture, and power.
So much there. Vibrant, innovative. Our cities? Is he serious? These are the cultural hubs. Our cities are vibrant. I don't know. Let's cut to this image of the streets of Philadelphia today. There you have it. That's the cities that I know, right? They've got tents. They've got people that are obviously addicted to drugs that are shooting up because we provide them with the drugs. We want to make sure they have safe needles. These people are zonked out. They look like zombies, if you're looking at this clip, and they're content because they're probably also getting debit cards so that they can continue to do drugs. We know that New York City is facing a migrant crisis. We know that San Francisco actually has to hire people to pick up human poop. But guys, Fareed wants you to know that, I don't know, that's just a symbol of our democracy. Don't you believe him? That's what it means. It's an expression of our democracy that we come together with drug dealers and people that are committing crimes and people that you should be fearful of in the subways. Yeah, so what? Someone might throw you in front of a subway. So what? These cities are vibrant. That's actually that is the vibe, right? You might get thrown into a subway at any moment by a person that is homeless, by somebody that was just released right back onto the streets because of their democratic policies.
If you were to look at Owens' segment alone, you would rightfully conclude that Zakaria was only concerned with the so-called freedom of the people at the expense of peace in the city. However, that is obviously not the case. Instead, Zakaria took Carlson's presentation of Moscow and Russia head-on, debunking much of what Carlson was presenting in his video. Something that Candace Owens was more than happy to ignore.
And now, here's my take. Tucker Carlson's interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin got a lot of attention, but I was more struck by Carlson's reaction to his visit to Moscow, his first ever. He was not just impressed, it left him radicalized and enraged at his own government. Where to begin? Perhaps with the obvious reminder that living in Moscow, if you criticize the government, can mean prison or death, sometimes both. In Dubai, a few days after the interview, Carlson put forth a bizarre hodgepodge of assertions. He thought the architecture, food, and service in Moscow was better than in any American city. Really? Moscow, outside of a small historic center, is filled with drab Soviet-era concrete buildings. And while the food in Moscow can be quite good, better than New York or San Francisco, you need to get out more, Tucker. Many of his jibes were simply untrue. He praised Moscow, saying it is one of several wonderful places to live because, unlike America, Russia apparently doesn't suffer from, quote, rampant inflation, unquote. But using the Russian government's own data from last month, the country's inflation rate is 7.4%, almost 2.5 times that of America's. That's why interest rates in Russia are 16%, about 3 times higher than in America. In a short video segment shot in Moscow, Carlson shops at a local grocery store and marvels the groceries to feed a Russian family for a week cost maybe a quarter as much as similar groceries would cost in America. This outraged him. But Russia's per capita GDP is approximately $15,000 compared to America's, which is approximately $76,000. Stuff costs more in rich countries than in poorer ones. Carlson should go shopping in Mexico, where his groceries would also be much cheaper. Perhaps he'll gain newfound respect for the Mexican government. Carlson also marvels at the grandeur of a subway station, contrasting Moscow subways favorably with New York's, of course. Now, while it's true that Moscow subways are excellent, the stations are so grand because they were built by Joseph Stalin at huge public expense to showcase the superiority of Soviet communism. In contrast, New York subways are a product of capitalism, having been built and operated through public-private partnerships of various kinds, which are more budget-conscious. It's always been true that centralized autocracies can marshal the entire resources of society to build great vanity projects. Dhaka should go next to see the pyramids and the Taj Mahal. They're amazing. Carlson's entire riff about Russia is really about America. He said, I grew up in a country that had cities like Moscow and Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Singapore and Tokyo. New York is one of his favorite cities, he says, but as he sees it, American cities are now broken. Carlson was born in 1969. So the New York of the 1970s, he so fondly remembers, was in fact a city of rampant crime, riots, and graffiti, a city so badly mismanaged that it nearly declared bankruptcy in 1975. A 1977 blackout became legendary for the massive looting and crime it triggered. More than 800,000 people fled the city that decade, and real estate values plummeted. It wasn't just New York. San Francisco in that era was seen as a hotbed of hippies, drugs, pornography, and radical experimentation. The movie Dirty Harry, portraying out-of-control urban crime, was set in San Francisco in the 1970s. Crime rates in New York today, like in major American cities in general, are way down from their levels even in the 1980s and 1990s. Carlson speaks enviously of cities like Tokyo, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. I've been to all these cities many times, some of them in the last few months, and they are indeed wonderful in their own distinctive ways. But what's striking about all of them is that they are somewhat tame and subdued, the product of authoritarian governments or conformist culture or both. American cities are different. They are the product of decentralization and diversity and democracy. Jane Jacobs, the great writer on urban life, always described the best cities as kind of bottom-up systems, seemingly anarchic, but actually organic, and in the long run far superior to the abstract drawings of central planners. American cities are expressions of democracy, places where people have to negotiate differences and find ways to live together. That makes them messier and dirtier and sometimes chaotic, but perhaps that is what has made these cities so vibrant and innovative, and why they have been at the forefront in making America the country that leads the world in economics, technology, culture, and power.
Zakaria is explicitly talking about the fundamental inaccuracies in Carlson's coverage. Moscow isn't as clean as it claims to be. It is poorer and more controlled by Putin's kleptocratic government than anything we have in America. Comparing the American economy to that of a nation with almost twice the level of inflation is an absurdity that only an ideologue could hold onto, and Candace Owens, ever the ideologue herself, is more than happy to play along. Owens' deliberate decision to clip Stewart and Zakaria out of context is another example of her dishonesty. I would say that I'm surprised, but that would be a lie. Whether it is defending Kanye's absurd anti-Semitism or defending Russian authoritarianism, Owens consistently comes down on the wrong side of almost every political question. If she can't tell the difference between the wealthiest country on earth having problems and a kleptocratic state like Russia, then she has no business claiming to be a credible commentator in the public eye. And considering how she just left the Daily Wire because of her anti-Semitic tendencies, I can only hope the right will realize it too, though I'm not holding my breath.